Welcome to part one of the Airbnb project in Sketchup for Schools. And I'm going to be using the plan sketch that we made in class that day where we took all the dimensions down. And remember that the dimensions that we wrote down were the interior surfaces of the walls. And in Sketchup, we're doing the exterior of the building. So you need to make sure to add the wall thickness amount to all of your dimensions. And you can write that just on your plan sketch. I've already done that on mine, so I'm ready to start drawing. So the first thing you want to do is come over here to the view, scenes, and I want to be in a plan view, top-down view. So I'm going to select that one, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in parallel projection and not perspective projection. And this will make it a little bit easier to draw the stuff that we're going to be doing today. Once you've done that, you can close that tab, and you'll see that now you're in a plan view or a top-down view. So I'm going to use the pencil tool to simply draw the exterior footprint of the building. So I'm just going to start here, and I can move my pencil in the direction I want to go and just type in the dimension. So make sure you're locking onto the axes, otherwise your lines won't be, parallel and perpendicular to each other. So my dimension here is 42.5 feet. Your dimensions might be a little bit different because we had different dimensions in each class period when we measured the room. So make sure and use your dimensions and not mine. So I can simply type in 42.5 feet, enter, and then I can move up. Make sure you're locking on the axis. And this one is 28 feet. And then I'm going to come over and I can pan down so I can recenter. And then I can come over, and that was 6 feet and 3 feet. And this one was 30.5 feet. And back down 3 feet and over 6 feet. And I should end up being able to close my shape and still have a vertical line there. Okay, so now I've got my shape closed, and it turned a different color, which means it's a closed shape. So now I'm going to push-pull up, and before you do that, you might want to go back to one of the isometric views, and then I can pull up 10 feet, and that was our ceiling height. And so now we have the shape of our plan. Now let me go back to this view, and this was the way that we sketched it, where the doors were at the top. The sort of typical way of doing plans in architecture is to have the front door at the bottom of the drawing. So we actually had done that kind of backwards in class. So what I'm going to do now is rotate the whole thing. But to be able to do that, I want to be able to select it at the whole thing at one time. So I'm going to use my select tool, and I'm going to triple click, and that will select all of the geometry that touches. And then I'm going to right click and make a group. And that way it's all one object and not a bunch of separate faces and lines. Now I'm going to rotate and just pick a corner, and I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. And then I'm going to pan to recenter, and then I can move the whole thing back closer to the origin. And when you're moving 3D objects, sometimes it's best not to click on the object to move it, because then you don't know if you're clicking at 0 height or at 10 feet up or whatever. So if I click somewhere off the object itself, then I can move it along that same 0 height plane without messing it up. Okay, so now I've got my plan oriented the correct way, and if you want to go back and see what it looks like, see, I've got my little cutouts toward the bottom of the plan now instead of toward the top of the plan, which is kind of the standard. Okay, So now what I'm going to do is create my roof. In the instructions for the original project, it said that there was an existing gable roof. Okay, so what I'm going to do is draw my roof on top of this group that I made out of the exterior wall shape. So to do that, I'm going to use the tape measure tool, and I'm going to offset off however much you want. It's usually 2 or 3 feet is the overhang for a roof. I'm going to say 2 feet on mine. And I'm going to do that on all 4 upper edges. 2 feet there. And make sure you're on the axes, 2 feet. And 2 feet that way. And if you orbit, you can see that those guidelines are at the top of the building and not at the bottom of the building because I offset them from the top edges. And now I can draw a rectangle from that intersection to that intersection. And because my walls were a group, it's not attached yet. So what I'm going to do is push-pull this surface up 6 inches or 8 inches. That little 6 or 8 inch edge, it can be up to a foot, but that little 6 to 8 inch edge is called the fascia, and that's the board that covers the edges of the roof rafters. So I'm going to make mine 8. And let me pan down to recenter a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is draw a line from midpoint to midpoint. Midpoint there to midpoint there. And this is exactly what we did in one of the SketchUp tutorials when we first started doing SketchUp. Now I can select that line and make sure you're selecting only that line. And then I'm going to move that line up. Make sure you're locking it on the blue axis. And you can move it up however much you want. I'm not going to move mine up all that much. And you can see now I have a gable roof on my house. Now I could do a whole lot more to make it more realistic because most gable roofs they're not a flat triangle on the end, but we're going to end up adding to this roof later anyway because we need to make the covered porch here on the front of the building. So I'm going to wait and do that when we do the covered porch part. So I want to make my roof a group also. So I'm going to triple click it, which will select all the connected geometry that's not already a group. That's why it's not selecting the bottom walls. Right click, make a group. Now you can select all these guidelines and delete them. And that is part 1 of the Airbnb project in SketchUp.